In this video 5.1, we're going to be looking at fractions, decimals, and percents. By the end of the video and work time in class, you should be able to say, I can convert between fractions, decimals, and percents. A percent is a ratio that compares a number to 100. We know how to work with fractions and decimals from trimester 1. We are now going to be converting between fractions, decimals, and percents. So those percents, once again, are ratios. That's comparing a number to 100. So if you have 100%, that's 100 out of 100. If you have 50%, that's 50 out of 100. If you have 80%, that's 80 out of 100. And so we're going to be working more and more with percents here throughout the chapter. First, by just some foundations, going from fraction to decimal and decimal to a percent. First, you have to take your numerator and divide it by the denominator to get your decimal. Once you have your decimal, you then, number 2, you move the decimal point to place values to the right. So, number 1, you turn a fraction to a decimal, and number 2, you're turning the decimal into a percentage. Now, moving a decimal point to place values to the right is the same as multiplying by 100. So a couple examples here. Let's say we have the fraction 3/25 and we want to turn that into a percentage. We can start by turning it into a decimal. We're going to take our numerator, divide it by our denominator, and we get 0.12 as our decimal. And then number 2, to move that decimal point 2 places to the right to turn it into a percent. 1, 2. I moved it 2 to the right. Whoa, we've got a crazy line there, which isn't erasing, but we'll leave it like that. So we get 12%. So 3 out of 25 would be 12%. So let's say you had 3 wrong on a quiz out of 25. You got 12% wrong. So if you got 12% wrong, that means you had 98% correct. Or I'm sorry, 88%. Woo, 88% correct. Do another example here. Let's just take a decimal. So a decimal, 2.5, 2.5. If you have 2.5 and you want to turn that to a percent, you move the decimal point 2 places to the right. 1, 2. When you have a blank, you put a 0 there. 2.5 is the same as 250%. You can definitely have over 100%. Over 100% makes sense in situations like if you did an assignment and you got extra credit, you got everything right plus some extra credit, you'd have over 100%. Or let's say you had a store and you were selling items in a store. You want to sell an item for more than 100% of what you purchased it for because you want to make a profit. So that would be another example of over 100%. You can have small percentages too. Let's say we had a decimal like 0.003, which is a small value. And let's say that decimal we wanted to turn into a percent. We'd move it 2 to the right. Excuse me. And you get 0.3 for your percentage. Now we're going to be moving a percent into a decimal and then that decimal into a fraction. So we're going backwards. What we're going to do is move now the decimal point 2 place values to the left. Once we do that, we have a decimal. Then we're going to write the number over the last place value and reduce. So let's take the percentage 20%. Now, we, number 1, move the decimal point 2 place values to the left. Now in 20%, I don't see a decimal point. If you don't see a decimal point, it is located at the end. So I'm adding my decimal point. I'm going to move it 2 place values to the left, which is the same as dividing by 100. So I moved it. So now I have a decimal, which is 0.2. To write a number or a decimal as a fraction, a lot of times what I just say is just read it. How do you say 0.2? It's 2/10. You write the number over that place value, which is in the tenths. So 2/10, and we reduce that to a fifth. So 20% is the same as 0.2, which is the same as 1/5. Let's say I had 7.5%. Let's say I had a tax of something at 7.5%, and I want to turn that to a fraction. I first need to turn it into a decimal. Well, I'm going to find a decimal point. It's still a percent. Even though there's a decimal, it's still a percentage. You can have decimal points in percents. We have a percent, we still need to turn it into a decimal. So we move the decimal point 2 to the left. So now our decimal is 0.075. And so to turn our decimal to a fraction, like I said, just read that decimal. And that would be 75 thousandths. Or you write the number over that last place value, which the 5 is in the thousandths. And then that reduces, because you can divide both 75 and 1,000 by 25, and you get 3/40ths for your lowest terms fraction. Ordering numbers that are decimals, fractions, percentages, ordering them from least to greatest, what you want to do is put all of the numbers in the same form. I tend to put them all in a decimal, so I'm going to turn 27% into a decimal. So to do that, I move the decimal 2 to the left. So I have 0.27, 0.24, and 1/5, which is 1 divided by 5, is the same as 2/10, 0.2. So I'm going to compare these decimals going from left to right. They all have a 2 in the tenths place value, so they're all the same at that point. Now in the hundredths place value, they're different. We have a 7, we have a 4, and here we have 0. So the smaller it is, then the smallest that value is. So in looking at the 0, that's going to be my smallest. So that's 1/5. So 1/5 is my smallest. Then 4, so it's going to be 0.24. And then 27%. So when we write our answer, we put it back into the original form that they were in the problem. Can you say I can convert between fractions, decimals, and percents? Here's your output, and be prepared for with any questions for the work time in class.